Good evening and welcome to The Right Side, the show where we talk about today's news, views, trends, and opinions from an admittedly conservative perspective. I'm your host, Chris Pareja, and this evening we're joined by Michael Medved. He's a nationally syndicated radio show host, he's an author, and all-around great guy. Right,
well,
Michael?
thank you. Absolutely right.
Thanks for joining us.
I think my wife would agree, but I hope so.
This is good. Not all wives agree about all-around good guys, so this is off to a start.
We just celebrated a week ago our 33rd anniversary.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And so, how long ago did this whole authorship start? 33 years ago or more?
Oh, more. I was, it's funny because my mom used to say, may she rest in peace, like every little scrap of paper that her 4 boys generated. And I came across, I had made myself a calling card when I was in 2nd grade. And it said on it, writer. It actually said on it, famous writer. And but famous spelled wrong because it was 2nd grade.
Right.
But no, so I've always wanted to write books. I wrote my first novel, which was not an ambitious effort, but not a successful one when I was in 8th grade, under the tutelage of my 8th grade public school teacher at Dana Junior High School in San Diego.
So what was the topic of a novel written by an 8th grader?
I was very taken up with Dickens at the time. And so it was about Dickensian Pennsylvania, because I thought, London I didn't know anything about. I was born in Philadelphia. So basically it was about a complicated family, as most Dickens novels are, with all kinds of surprise identities and switches in Pennsylvania in the 1840s.
And have you considered editing it and re-releasing it?
No. But I did do a novel for my senior project in college, and I was given credit for it, and that one we came close to publishing if I had been willing to trim it down. It was much too long.
Okay.
And then I went on with this was always what I wanted to do. I went to law school, and I basically escaped from going back to law school. I had taken a leave of absence to work in politics, and then I was going to go back to law school unless my agent was able to get me a book contract, and he actually ended up getting me 3 of them. So it's very, at Yale Law School, they still list me as a graduate, even though I did not graduate.
Well, they've got to get credit.
Well, the credit I got, my law school classmates included Bill and Hillary Clinton and Clarence Thomas.
Did you get a chance to actually know them at that point, or they just were part of the class?
I knew Bill a little bit and loathed him. We used to call him Eddie Haskell, if you remember Leave It to Beaver. Yeah. And I liked Hillary. She was a, at the time you would say a nice girl. Sorry, but she was a pleasant person. She was kind of den mother, because our class was 165 people, but there are only 15 women. And Hillary was the one who was kind of down to earth and friendly to everybody, not considered, you'll pardon the expression at the time, great date bait. There was a woman, I don't know what happened to her, and it's funny, I don't think I've talked about this publicly. There was a woman named Myra Goldenberg who was really the glamour girl of the law school class, and I'm sure she's a federal court judge or something like that now. But
she hasn't run for president or anything?
Not yet. Okay. Not yet. But in any event, I have been in intermittent touch with Secretary Clinton, and one of the many areas in which I differ from some of my conservative colleagues, I don't believe she's an evil person. I believe she's had a very difficult marriage, and politics hasn't been good for her.
Right.
And nor has she been particularly good for politics, but that's another story.
Side story. So, and now you started out in 8th grade writing novels and then senior projects in college. You're 13 books in now.
Yes, that's right. My 13th book just came out, and most of my books I still like. I can pick them up and look at them. My first book was published in 1976 when I was a kid, and it ended up doing well. It was a book about my high school class called What Really Happened to the Class of '65. And and it ended up being a very bad TV series on NBC, which got me a little bit more interested in the Hollywood aspect of things. And because of that book, I was a member of the Writers Guild. And you know, it's like, basically, I've had a tough time sort of settling on one career, because I believe it's always harder to hit a moving target. Right. And again, part of the changes, I don't know about you, Chris, but I was raised in a very much a Democratic Party, a sort of standard liberal home. My parents weren't, I was not a red diaper doper baby or anything of that nature, but my parents were definitely to the left. And my migration from left to right, and I definitely consider myself conservative, I wrote about in a book called Right Turns, okay. Which goes along with the right side.
Right. So talk to me about the evolution, because I too, as you just kind of predicted, I came from a Democrat family. They weren't political activists by any means, right. But they tended to
My
side
parents
with
were.
Democratically oriented policies, et cetera, and still do.
You know why, if you don't mind my jumping in? There has been this traditional belief, and still is, and it's the only reason the Democratic Party survives with all of its outrageously foolish positions and policies, which are demonstrable, because there's the assumption the Democrats are the party of the little guy. It's been working for Democrats since Andrew Jackson. And it's been kind of absurd for a long time. If you look at the demographics, and this is fascinating to me, the Democrats do very well with people who are poor and people who are down and out and have a tough time. They do very well with people who are supremely wealthy.
And feel guilty about it.
Well, they don't necessarily feel guilty about it. They just feel this is what enlightened people do. Maybe, certainly a lot of the Hollywood people feel guilty about it because they can't explain their own wealth. But in any event, the Republican Party dominates among people who are in between. In other words, the Republican Party is not and never has been the party of the rich. It's the party of people who want to work to get rich.
But marketing says it's not that way, and so people
Correct.
have this animosity toward these wealthy Republicans who aren't.
See, I believe that my own journey is typical of a lot of people, a lot of conservatives, which is, it was the 3 Ps that moved me from left to right. And 3 Ps being paychecks, parenthood, and prayer. Meaning, paychecks, all of a sudden, you start earning a little bit of money. You know, I have my first successful book, and you start getting paychecks.
Right.
And wait a minute, what happened to my money?
Right.
The government took it. Oh, that's what my parents, that's what older people talk about, worrying about taxes. You're in school, you're in graduate school, you don't know from taxes. All of a sudden you do. Parenthood. There's nothing that has had a more profoundly conservative impact on me than holding our first daughter, Sarah, and saying, oh, I'm responsible for this person. All of a sudden you have a longer term perspective. How is she going to grow up? How are we going to provide for her? And then prayer. Like a lot of people, I started off quite secular. I mean, Jewish background, but my parents were always somewhat religious, but not intensely so. And then gradually I moved more. I mean, I've been active in Orthodox congregations, Orthodox Jewish congregations, for a long time, almost 40 years.
And so, looking at society in the context of the 3 Ps, it is oftentimes difficult to operate if you've got all 3 of those firing in your direction, or to feel like, at least here in the Bay Area or in Seattle where you're from, like you're part of a majority, or that people think like you.
I like being contrarian. I kind of always have. You know, when I was a little kid, one of my favorite shows on TV was the Dobie Gillis show. And I didn't identify with Dobie Gillis. I identified with Maynard G. Krebs, who was the beatnik, nonconformist. And the thing about growing up in California to some extent, and then I started college when I was 16, but going away to college and in the 60s, was that it killed nonconformism. All of a sudden, being a nonconformist was the most conforming thing you could do. The thing that was nonconforming and contrarian and that appealed to me was, I went through Yale in the 60s, and I was very much against SDS and the extreme left and against drugs. And yes, I consider marijuana, I know it's legal now in this state. Yeah, I consider that a drug too.
Right. And so, nonconformists, I chuckle as you said that, just because we were before the show, people might know you well from your radio career, but we talked about you being in TV for 12 years, including on
PBS,
on
public
PBS.
television, the people's television. Yes, I've often said I spent 12 years on PBS, which were 3 of the happiest weeks of my life. Look, I had the experience, and it really did become a problem. I was an outspoken opponent. While we had a national show on PBS, I was an outspoken opponent of government funding for public television. And you know what? When you work in the system, and Chris, you may not even know this, in terms of public television, the government at all levels, and there are such things as local and statewide subsidies for public broadcasting as well,
yes.
But the government at all levels pays less than 10% of the total tab. It's meaningless. The only reason that it's considered so important is it's a validation. In other words, you want to say, oh, I work for PBS, which is above this grubby, commercial, profit-seeking, for-profit TV operations.
Well, and the other thing is that even in your experience way back then, the people, at least in the Bay Area that I've talked to, think that PBS is a neutral kind of a platform, but it leans heavily left. They just don't know the difference.
No, of course it leans left. And it's very peculiar because most of the money is provided by corporate underwriting, which, by the way, is another myth that needs to be blown up, is the idea that corporations are on the right. Most big corporations are emphatically not on the right.
They're on the winning side, whichever side that happens to be this cycle.
Well, yes and no, but I think that there are a lot of, you're talking about guilt before. In other words, a lot of corporations do feel that they have to give back. And then again, for people in that right socioeconomic class, giving back means giving to liberal causes, and PBS is very much included. Now, I say this, some of the very best things on PBS were funded by big corporations. People don't know this, but that great Civil War series was not paid for by the U.S. government. It was paid for by General Motors.
Right. Well, and I even see people from inside large corporations bad-mouthing the large corporations. It's not theirs that's given them a career and a resume and travel the world and everything else. There's always a disconnect between even their own reality and the ideology that they're espousing, being that all corporations are evil and everything else. It's just very odd.
It's one of those things where one of the things that, you know, I almost hate to admit it because I was influenced when I was in my mid-20s, when I came relatively late to reading Ayn Rand. Because the one thing that you can take away from Ayn Rand, and yes, a lot of it is pretentious and it's soggy and it's overdone and it's over the top. Fine, got it. But she makes the case so emphatically that there's nothing wrong with wanting to build a business and to make money.
Right.
That makes the world better. It is the desire of people to build stuff and to profit from it and to build something beautiful that has made this country possible.
Right.
And it wasn't people trying to sacrifice themselves. It was people trying to benefit themselves. And enough people benefiting themselves creates a beautiful society, which I believe America is.
Agreed. And I also like that she makes cronyism look really bad in the end.
Yeah, but it's also the claims of victimhood, which is, I had the opportunity on my radio show today to talk to the great Shelby Steele, who was talking about how racial politics in the United States has just been poisoned by this competitive victimhood. Who suffered most? And look, most people at one time or another who have come to the United States, including, by the way, early white European settlers, but most people have gone through periods of suffering. in my new book,
I was going to say, this is a great segue to talk about the American Miracle.
See two TV pros here.
Yeah, there you go. No, this is great.
Right. Most people are unaware that the Pilgrims, we celebrate every Thanksgiving, most of them didn't make it. Most of them died that first winter, and the overwhelming majority of the women who died in disproportionate numbers. But one of the reasons they invited the local Indians to come celebrate is there were so few of them left. They had slightly over half of the original 143 had perished in the wintertime.
Right, so they had extra food, they wanted to share with the natives.
They did want to share with the natives, right. And what was interesting about that is the natives didn't come empty-handed. All of a sudden there were more Indians at the first Thanksgiving than there were Pilgrims. And the Indians came bringing 5 deer. And we don't think, they may have eaten a turkey or 2, but mostly they ate deer and beer. The Pilgrims were very, very big on beer. In fact, arguably, the first words exchanged in English between Native Americans and English settlers in the New World, in 1621, there was an Indian who walked out of the woods named Samoset to this New Plymouth settlement, and he was clad only in a breechclout, loincloth basically, and it was a May day. And he's walking out, and they were nervous because he's a large person, and he was carrying a big bow and arrow, and all of a sudden they came out to greet him, and he said, apparently bowing very low, "Welcome, Englishmen. You have beer?" First words, yeah.
Yeah, and so Pilgrims caused alcoholism within...
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Right. He actually, they didn't have any beer left, but they did have what they call aqua vitae, which they think was a plant-based booze that he did enjoy. He also ate them out of house and home before they sent him on his way, and then he helped to introduce them to Squanto, and again, this is one of the things, my book, The American Miracle, is about all of the coincidences that are very difficult to explain as coincidences.
Unless you believe in the third P, being prayer.
Right, and providence, and that's the fourth P.
Yeah.
And the point that I make in the book is, look, most people today will say that America got to be this great country in this rather thinly settled, desolate part of the world, that the dominant civilization arose in North America because America was so guilty, and we were so greedy, and we were so guilty of genocide and exploiting African slaves and destroying the environment, et cetera, et cetera. The problem with that explanation is there are many other countries that were far worse than Britain or the British settlers, the Spanish settlers, Portuguese settlers, right. Dutch settlers, and they did not create this wonderful civilization that has had this tremendous influence and power and prosperity.
Right.
So then people say, well, it must be happy accidents. Well, there were just a lot of happy accidents that allowed America to, except a pattern of happy accidents is still a pattern. And it's evidence of intelligent design, not random evolution.
Right.
And that brings us to what George Washington and John Winthrop and William Bradford of Plymouth Colony and Franklin Roosevelt and John Kennedy and Ronald Reagan all believed, and Abraham Lincoln very much, which is it was divine will. There was a providential direction to the emergence of the United States, not because we deserved it, not because we were the best people in the world, but because the Lord of history, or the will of history, to use the Hegelian term, had chosen America as a vehicle for his purposes. And when you look at the profoundly beneficial influence of America on the whole world, right. It seems to me that's incontrovertible.
Well, and if you look at various faith backgrounds, it is all about not being necessarily deserving, but being blessed, being chosen by God to succeed. And so,
right, and that confers not special privileges, but special responsibilities.
Absolutely. And it doesn't mean that you're an imperialist or any of those other things. It means that things work out in your direction if the Lord chooses that you go that direction. Talk about some of those. We have a few minutes left. Talk about one or two of those that really stood out to you from the book.
I'll tell you, there's one that is just so striking and so astonishing. Is I have a chapter about George Washington as an individual, and it's called Indispensable, Indestructible. George Washington goes out to the Battle of Monongahela. He's one of 70 British officers, because he was in Virginia militia, which at that time was fighting with the British against French and Indians in 1755. And of those 70 officers, 69 were either killed or wounded. Most of them were killed. It was the worst day in the history of British arms. Braddock's Defeat, it's called. And George Washington alone, he had 2 horses shot out from under him. He had bullet holes in his hat. They fired at him repeatedly, untouched. And this continued throughout his career, and it was commented on by the British during the Revolution. They seemed unable to hit George Washington, and there are all these commentaries at the time about him being protected. After this, he's 23 years old at the Battle of Monongahela in 1755. And he comes back. Samuel Davies, who's later president of Princeton University, he's a leading Presbyterian cleric. He gives a sermon in Henry County, Virginia, and says, I want to commend to your attention that heroic youth, Colonel Washington, 23 years old at the time, who surely has been raised up by God and protected so he can perform some great service to his people. Okay? Pride kind of, and this on the guy who was the president of the Constitutional Convention and the first president of the United States and a commander who won the revolution. Washington was terribly aware that there was what he referred to as an invisible hand that allowed the revolution to succeed. And the best evidence of that is the Battle of Brooklyn in August of 1776. It's the biggest battle of the Revolutionary War in terms of the number of men engaged on both sides. Disaster for the Americans. They're trapped in a little corner of Brooklyn and Brooklyn Heights, the British on all sides, and a big British fleet on the East River. And they escaped. How? It's August. They had a fog that was so dense, they described it as almost a biblical fog, like the plague of darkness in the book of Exodus. Mm-hmm. And they were able to row out on little boats. And it's like Dunkirk, if you've seen the movie and you know the story. But every single one got out. Washington was the last one on the boat, and as he was crossing to the other side, all of a sudden the fog lifted and it was daybreak.
Providential.
Right. And a British commentator at the time, one of the other side, said it seemed as if they had been made to disappear by Aladdin's magical lamp.
Not quite parting of seas, but pretty much the creation of invisibility.
And here's another thing, and it's so shocking, is on July 2nd, 1776, Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, 2 names that everybody knows, were asked to design a seal, Great Seal for the United States. It showed Moses leading the people through the Red Sea.
Incredible story, lots of correlation, but unfortunately we're out of time for the moment. If you'll hold on for just a second, we need to take a break for a word from our underwriters, the Conservative Forum.
Some people think that a meeting of conservatives in Silicon Valley could fit in a small room. In fact, when the Conservative Forum was founded in 2003, we did meet in a small room, a coffee shop in San Jose. It doesn't get more grassroots than this. It may surprise you that there are thousands of people right here in Silicon Valley who share your principles of liberty, free markets, and limited government. Since our humble beginnings in that coffee shop, we've outgrown 3 meeting halls. From San Jose to Gilroy to Mill Valley, we bring hundreds of people together each month from all over the Bay Area to promote the principles of American liberty. How do we do it? It starts with a stellar lineup of speakers. Speakers like Steve Forbes, Senator Jim DeMint, Dr. Victor Davis Hanson, Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, Andrew Breitbart, Pamela Geller, and many others. These speakers passionately articulate our shared principles and remind us why conservatism isn't just the smart choice, it's also the moral choice. Our monthly meetings are only one dimension of the forum. We underwrite The Right Side, a monthly television show on cable access channel KMVT. We also host a monthly Constitution discussion group and provide tables at our meetings for more than a dozen local groups who share our love of liberty to promote their specific cause. The Conservative Forum is the premier place in Silicon Valley for conservatives to gather, become invigorated, motivated, and empowered. We welcome guests to our monthly meetings and offer special discounted pricing to first-time visitors. Take a look at our speaker lineup in the coming months and join us to learn why we say liberty is made in America.
And that was a word from our underwriters, the Conservative Forum. They've underwritten our show now for this is the 7th season, and we're extremely excited to be able to continue to partner with them on the show. And they're actually the reason that we were able to have Michael join us in the studio this evening. But what they're best known for is the speaker series where Michael will be speaking later this evening. It happens at the second Tuesday normally of the month. However, this is a special taping, and so Michael will be there, this being the last week of January. But it happens at the IFES Portuguese Hall at 432 Sterling Road, just a few minutes from here in Mountain View. In February, Dr. Gary Wolfram, he's a professor from Hillsdale College, will be speaking, and in March, author and pundit Ann Coulter will be speaking. In April, Charles C. Cook, editor of National Review Online, and many more that you can find on the Conservative Forum's website, which also is transitioning to the Liberty Forum with the name change that began at the beginning of the year. So you can look up more information there on the times that the speaking engagements occur, etc. But in closing this evening, we ran a little short on time. Michael, I do appreciate you joining us, and there was a lot we didn't get to cover. But if people wanted to learn more about you, your books, general thought process, where can they find more information?
Well, first of all, to listen every day. I'm on from noon to 3 on AM 860 in the San Francisco Bay Area. It's one of our 300 radio stations. And michaelmedved.com. And it's Medved, M-E-D, V as in victory, E-D, not V as in victim.
Okay, no victimhood here.
No.
Excellent. Well, thank you again for joining us.
You bet. Chris, great to talk to you.
Great to talk to you, too. And we appreciate all of you joining in on the conversation. You can reach out to us if you'd like to continue the conversation at therightsidetv@gmail.com, or ideally, we'll see you either in person or on the show sometime soon. I've been your host, Chris Pareja. This has been The Right Side. Thanks again. Have a great night.